June 12, 1943. Capoterra airfield, southwestern Sardinia. The Mediterranean sun beat down on the dusty tarmac as Italian ground crew gathered around an aircraft that should not have been there. Twin booms gleaming in the afternoon light. Distinctive central nacelle, the unmistakable silhouette that Allied bomber crews had learned to welcome and Axis pilots had learned to fear. A Lockheed P-38 Lightning sat on Italian soil, its American star and bar insignia, a jarring contrast to the landscape of war-torn Sardinia. The pilot who had just climbed down from the cockpit stood bewildered, his navigation error complete. He had meant to land at an Allied airfield, perhaps Gibraltar, perhaps Malta. The exact intended destination would remain unclear. What was clear was the catastrophic mistake. His compass had failed, his situational awareness had faltered. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. And now he stood on enemy territory with one of America's most advanced fighters intact behind him. Within hours, news of the capture reached Guidonia Airfield northeast of Rome, home to the Regia Aeronautica's Test and Research Center. Within days, the Lightning would be flying again, but this time it would carry German crosses and Italian markings, and the men analyzing its performance would be studying not how to fly with it, but how to fight against it. The intelligence windfall was extraordinary, but what neither the pilot who landed at Capoterra nor the intelligence officers who would dissect his aircraft could have known was that this single navigation error would provide Axis engineers with their first comprehensive look at a revolutionary design philosophy that challenged everything they thought they knew about twin-engine fighters. The story of how German and Italian pilots evaluated America's fork-tailed devil reveals not merely technical specifications translated across enemy lines, but a profound confrontation between two fundamentally different approaches to fighter design. And in the detailed reports these test pilots would write, buried between performance figures and handling characteristics, lay an admission that would have been unthinkable in 1937 when the Lightning was first conceived. They had never seen twin-engine speed like it. To understand what made the P-38 such a revelation to Axis test pilots requires understanding the problem Lockheed was solving when Kelly Johnson's team first put pencil to paper in 1936. The United States Army Air Corps had issued Circular Proposal X-608 on February 11, 1937, and the specifications read like a wish list from pilots who understood that war was coming and America's existing interceptors were dangerously obsolete. 360 miles per hour at 20,000 feet, climb to that altitude in 6 minutes, maintain full power for at least 1 hour, armament consisting of at least 1 cannon and 4 heavy machine guns, and accomplish all of this for less than $50,000 per aircraft. Most manufacturers looked at these requirements and designed conventional single-engine fighters with the most powerful engines available: Curtiss, Seversky, Bell. They all followed the established playbook because it had worked for 2 decades, but Johnson and Hall-Hibbard at Lockheed saw something different. The math was simple and unforgiving. To achieve 360 miles per hour while carrying that much armament required approximately 2,000 horsepower. The most powerful aircraft engine available in 1937, the Allison V1000, 710, produced only 1,050 horsepower. You could not simply scale up an engine. The physics did not work that way. So Lockheed made a decision that sounded insane to conventional thinking. They would use 2 engines. Twin-engine fighters had been attempted before. Every attempt had resulted in aircraft too heavy, too sluggish, and utterly unable to compete with nimble single-engine designs. Every aviation expert in 1937 knew that twin engines meant compromised performance. But Johnson's team was not building a conventional twin-engine fighter. They were engineering something unprecedented. The configuration they developed solved problems that had plagued fighter design since the Wright brothers. Counter-rotating propellers eliminated torque effects that made every single-engine fighter pull violently during takeoff and high-power climbs. The twin-boom design with central nacelle gave pilots unobstructed forward visibility that single-engine designs could never match. Tricycle landing gear provided stable ground handling where conventional tail draggers were inherently dangerous. And perhaps most revolutionary, the turbocharged Allison engines maintained full power at altitudes where other fighters wheezed ineffectively. When the first XP-38 prototype rolled out of Lockheed's Burbank facility on December 31, 1938, it looked like something from science fiction. On January 27, 1939, test pilot Ben Kelsey took it up and reported that the aircraft performed flawlessly. By February, the prototype was hitting 400 miles per hour in level flight. The Army Air Corps had asked for 360. Lockheed had delivered 400. But in June 1943, when that P-38G sat on the tarmac at Capoterra, it represented not the prototype but a mature combat aircraft that had evolved through multiple variants. The G model featured refined intercoolers, updated hydraulics, and the operational experience of 2 years of combat testing in North Africa and the Pacific. This was the aircraft that Italian test pilot Lieutenant Colonel Angelo Tondi would fly from Capoterra to Gidonia. Tondi was no amateur. At 41 years old, he commanded the first terrestrial aircraft unit of the first experimental center at Gidonia. He had flown virtually every aircraft in the Italian inventory. He understood aerodynamics, engine management, and combat tactics. His job was to evaluate captured aircraft and develop tactics to exploit their weaknesses. He had flown captured Spitfires. He had tested French fighters abandoned during the collapse of France, but he had never flown anything like the P-38. The approach to Capoterra on that June afternoon gave Tondi his first impression. The Lightning sat lower than he expected. The tricycle gear meant the fuselage remained level, not nose high like the tail draggers he was accustomed to. Walking around the aircraft revealed details that would prove significant during testing. The twin Allison V-1710 engines mounted in nacelles at the leading edge of the wing. The turbo superchargers housed in the tail booms behind each engine, connected by carefully insulated exhaust ducting. The central nacelle was narrow, streamlined, and mounted entirely forward of the wing. The pilot sat in a position that seemed impossibly exposed compared to the protective bulk of a radial engine in front of a conventional fighter. The armament mounted in the nose represented a concentration of firepower, unprecedented in single-seat fighters. 4 50-caliber Browning machine guns and one 20mm Hispano cannon, all firing forward through the propeller arc without synchronization gear, because there was no propeller in front of the guns. The rounds converged at a point approximately 300 yards ahead, creating a cone of destruction that could saw a bomber in half or reduce a fighter to flaming debris in a 2-second burst. Tondi climbed into the cockpit and found himself in an environment unlike any fighter he had flown. The visibility was extraordinary. No engine cowling blocked forward view. The canopy provided 180 degrees of unobstructed vision. He could see the ground directly in front of the nose wheel during taxi. Every other fighter he had flown required weaving back and forth during ground operations because the pilot could not see where he was going. The instrument panel was American in layout and language, but the basics were universal. Engine instruments duplicated for left and right engines, manifold pressure gauges, RPM indicators, cylinder head temperature, oil pressure and temperature, fuel quantity gauges showing the complex fuel system with multiple tanks and transfer pumps. The throttle quadrant featured 2 throttle levers, one for each engine, but experienced pilots quickly learned to operate them together as a unit. The control yoke was conventional, connected to hydraulically boosted ailerons that would prove surprisingly light for such a large aircraft. Rudder pedals controlled the twin vertical stabilizers. Trim wheels for elevator, rudder, and aileron allowed fine adjustment of control forces. Tondi started the engines using procedures hastily translated from the aircraft's technical documents. The Allisons came to life with a characteristic sound, deeper and smoother than the high-pitched scream of Italian inline engines or the stuttering roar of radials. The counter-rotating propellers meant no torque correction was needed. The aircraft sat perfectly straight as power came up. Taxiing revealed the genius of the tricycle gear. The aircraft responded predictably to rudder and differential throttle. There was no tendency to ground loop. Visibility remained perfect. Tondi could taxi at normal speeds where conventional fighters crept along, weaving to see ahead. The takeoff run was different from any fighter Tondi had experienced. He advanced both throttles smoothly and the P-38 accelerated without pulling left or right. No torque correction needed. The nose remained level throughout the ground roll. At approximately 90 miles per hour, Tondi eased back on the yoke and the Lightning lifted off with no drama, no tendency to swing, no need for heavy rudder correction. The aircraft simply flew. Climbing through 5,000 feet, Tondi began exploring the flight envelope. The first impression was speed. Even at moderate power settings, the P-38 accelerated smoothly and willingly. The airspeed indicator wound up toward 300 miles per hour, with both engines developing cruise power. Tondi pushed the throttles forward and watched the airspeed increase to 350, 370, 400 miles per hour. At that speed, the P-38 was faster than any Italian fighter in service. It was faster than the Macchi MC-202 Folgore that equipped Italy's best fighter squadrons. It was faster than the Reggiane Re 2001 that had shown promise in North Africa. And the American aircraft was still accelerating. The handling characteristics revealed surprising agility for such a large aircraft. The hydraulically boosted ailerons provided roll rates that, while not matching the instant response of lightweight Italian fighters, were far better than expected for a twin-engine design. The P-38 could execute aileron rolls, though not with the snap-roll violence of a Folgore. The aircraft transitioned smoothly from left bank to right, the roll rate limited more by the aircraft's significant span and moment of inertia than by control force or effectiveness. Elevator response was positive and predictable. The aircraft pitched up and down with reasonable authority, though Tondi noticed the control forces increased significantly at higher speeds. This was characteristic of all high-speed aircraft. As airspeed increased, control surfaces encountered greater aerodynamic forces, requiring more pilot input to achieve the same response. But even at 400 miles per hour, the P-38 remained controllable, demanding firm pressure rather than brute force. Rudder effectiveness was excellent, as would be expected from twin vertical stabilizers. The aircraft tracked straight during climbs and could be side-slipped aggressively for rapid altitude loss if needed. Tondi experimented with single-engine flight, shutting down the left engine and feathering its propeller. The P-38 flew smoothly on one engine, with surprisingly little asymmetric thrust tendency. The remaining engine maintained altitude easily at normal cruise speeds. This redundancy represented a capability that no single-engine fighter could match. Over the Mediterranean, over North Africa, over any combat zone where mechanical failure meant death or capture, that second engine provided insurance no amount of performance could replace. Tondi explored the high-altitude capabilities that were rumored to make the P-38 so dangerous. Climbing through 20,000 feet, he noted that the Allison engines continued producing strong power. The turbo-superchargers were working exactly as designed, compressing thin air and forcing it into the engines at pressure levels equivalent to much lower altitudes. At 25,000 feet, the P-38 maintained full military power, while Italian fighters at that altitude struggled with engines starved for oxygen. At 30,000 feet, Tondi found himself in air so thin that his pressurized oxygen mask was essential for consciousness, yet the Lightning's engines continued running smoothly, still producing enough power for combat maneuvering. This altitude capability represented a tactical advantage that was difficult to overstate. An Italian fighter at 30,000 feet was at the extreme edge of its operational envelope, slow, sluggish, and vulnerable. The P-38 at 30,000 feet was operating well within its capabilities, fast, responsive, and deadly. The armament was test-fired at a safe altitude over water. Tondi pressed the trigger and felt the aircraft shudder slightly, as 4 50 caliber machine guns and one 20mm cannon fired simultaneously. The nose-mounted weapons meant no convergence issues. Every round fired went exactly where the gun pointed. The tracer pattern was tight, concentrated, devastatingly accurate. A 2-second burst represented approximately 130 50 caliber rounds and 40 20mm shells, concentrated into a killing zone, small enough to destroy any aircraft that flew through it. After 90 minutes aloft, Tondi returned to Guidonia to file his initial report. The P-38 Lightning, he concluded, was a genuine threat. Its speed matched or exceeded the best Italian fighters. Its altitude performance surpassed anything in Italian service. Its firepower could destroy any Italian aircraft with a brief burst. Its twin engines provided reliability advantages that single-engine designs could never match. And perhaps most troubling, its visibility and tricycle gear made it easier to operate than conventional fighters, reducing training time and pilot workload. But Tondi also identified weaknesses. The P-38's large size made it less maneuverable than Italian fighters in turning combat. Its significant weight meant energy management was critical. Once the aircraft bled off speed in a hard turn, it required time and altitude to accelerate again. The twin-boom configuration created blind spots directly aft where the tail structure blocked rearward vision. And the aircraft's complexity, while providing redundancy, also created more potential failure points. 2 engines meant twice the maintenance. Turbochargers were temperamental devices that required careful operation. The hydraulic systems were sophisticated but vulnerable to combat damage. These weaknesses would become the foundation for tactical recommendations. Italian and German fighters should avoid prolonged turning engagements with the P-38, where the Lightning's superior power and energy could overwhelm lighter aircraft. Instead, they should use hit-and-run tactics, diving from altitude, making a single high-speed pass, and extending away before the P-38 could respond. The American aircraft's straight-line speed was formidable, but in the vertical plane, in dives and climbing extensions, conventional fighters might maintain parity. But the real intelligence value came not from a single evaluation flight. Tondi flew the P-38 repeatedly over the following weeks, accumulating hours, testing systems, exploring edge conditions. He flew mock combat against Italian fighters, learning through direct comparison where the Lightning excelled and where it struggled. He pushed the aircraft through aggressive maneuvers to find its limits. He tested the engines at various power settings to understand their operating envelope, and gradually, a complete picture emerged. The P-38 represented a different philosophy of fighter design. American engineers had prioritized speed, firepower, and altitude performance over traditional dogfighting agility. They had accepted the weight penalty of twin engines in exchange for power and reliability. They had embraced complexity in pursuit of capability. And the result was an aircraft that redefined what a fighter could accomplish. For bomber escorts, the Lightning's range and altitude performance were unmatched. For interception, its speed and climb rate were formidable. For ground attack, its firepower and structural strength were devastating. It was not the best turning fighter. It was not the most agile aircraft. But in the missions that mattered in 1943, the P-38 excelled. Then came the unexpected opportunity. On August 11, 1943, Allied bombers returned from striking targets at Terni in Umbria. Tondi, flying the captured P-38 from Guidonia, took off to intercept. The formation consisted of approximately 50 Boeing B-17 flying fortresses, their silver skin gleaming at 25,000 feet. The German crosses hastily painted on the P-38's fuselage and wings were intended to identify the aircraft as friendly to German and Italian anti-aircraft batteries. To the American bomber crews, the silhouette was unmistakable. A friendly Lightning had arrived as unexpected escort. Tondi selected a target. B-17, G number 42-30307, nicknamed Bonnie Sue, flew in the formation's defensive box. The bomber's crew saw the P-38 approaching and assumed it was providing cover. The realization came too late. Tondi opened fire from a range of 300 yards. The nose-mounted guns did not need to converge. Every round fired went straight ahead. 50 caliber bullets and 20mm shells raked the B-17's right wing and fuselage. The number 3 engine exploded, propeller windmilling as burning fuel streamed from ruptured tanks. The bomber fell out of formation, losing altitude rapidly. 6 crewmen managed to parachute out before the B-17 hit the Mediterranean off the shore of Torvaianica near Rome. The water impact at terminal velocity destroyed the aircraft instantly. 3 crew members died in the crash. Tondi's attack had proven the P-38's lethality, but it had also revealed a darker tactical possibility. If Italian or German pilots could fly captured American aircraft, they could approach Allied formations without triggering defensive responses until it was too late. 9 days later, the 301st Bomb Group reported another loss to what they described as an enemy P-38, B-17, number 42-3-0344. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The Lady Evelyn was shot down under circumstances similar to Bonnie Sue. The official American loss records attributed both shootdowns to enemy action, unaware that the enemy was flying their own aircraft. These combat sorties with the captured Lightning were limited. The Italian fuel available at Guidonia was too corrosive for the P-38's tanks, which had been designed for American aviation gasoline with its specific additives and octane ratings. Operating the captured fighter on Italian fuel risked permanent damage to fuel system components. Extended use was impossible without American fuel supplies, which were obviously unavailable to Axis forces. But the evaluation program continued through August 1943. Italian engineers conducted detailed examinations of the P-38's systems. They studied the turbo-supercharger installations, marveling at the engineering sophistication required to route exhaust gases through the tail booms to the turbine units. They examined the counter-rotating propeller drives, understanding the mechanical complexity but appreciating the operational simplicity it provided. They analyzed the hydraulic systems, the electrical systems, the fuel transfer systems. Every component was documented, photographed, measured, and tested. The intelligence gathered from this single, captured P-38G was shared with German counterparts. By late summer 1943, as Italy's military situation deteriorated and the armistice of Cassibile loomed on September 8, plans were made to transfer the Lightning to German control. The Luftwaffe's interest in captured Allied aircraft had crystallized into a formal organization. The Circus Rosarius, named after its founder Theodore Rosarius, was an Erprobungskommando-style special test unit tasked with evaluating captured British and American aircraft. Formed in 1943 as part of the II. Staffel, Versuchsverband Oberbefehlshaber der Luftwaffe, the Circus operated from Rechlin, the Luftwaffe's primary flight test center in Mecklenburg. The mission was straightforward but vital. Test captured Allied aircraft to discover strengths and vulnerabilities. Develop tactics to counter their advantages and exploit their weaknesses. Tour operational Luftwaffe airfields to demonstrate the captured aircraft and train German pilots in recognition and counter-tactics. The Circus had already evaluated Spitfires, captured Hurricanes, and French fighters acquired during the fall of France in 1940. The P-38 Lightning would represent their first comprehensive evaluation of an advanced American twin-engine fighter. The transfer of the captured P-38G from Italian to German control occurred during the chaos following Italy's armistice. Exact dates and circumstances remain unclear in historical records, but by late 1943, the Lightning had been transported to Rechlin. The aircraft was repainted with German markings. The fuselage bore the standard Balkenkreuz, the black crosses with white outlines that identified Luftwaffe aircraft. The vertical stabilizers carried swastikas, and critically, the undersides of the fuselage, wings and tail were painted bright yellow. This color scheme was standard for aircraft under evaluation at Rechlin. The yellow markings served a practical purpose. German anti-aircraft batteries defending the test facility needed instant visual identification to prevent them from shooting down the very aircraft they were supposed to protect. A P-38 Lightning with its unmistakable twin-boom silhouette would normally draw immediate fire from German flak units. The bright yellow undersides signaled friend, not foe, preventing catastrophic friendly fire incidents. The aircraft was assigned the code T9 plus XB. The T9 designation identified it as part of the Circus Rosarius inventory. The unit had earned its own Geschwaderkennung, essentially a wing code that marked aircraft as belonging to their specialized evaluation squadron. Some Circus aircraft came from KG-200, the Luftwaffe Special Operations Unit that operationally flew captured Allied aircraft on covert missions. KG-200 used the A3 identification code, but the Circus Rosarius operated independently, conducting test flights rather than combat operations, and maintained its own T9 marking system. The German test pilot assigned to evaluate the P-38 was Hans Werner Lersch. Born in 1914, Lersch had been obsessed with aviation since childhood. He built flyable glider models, graduated to full-sized gliders, and methodically worked his way through every license and rating available to German civilian pilots before the war. When Hitler came to power in 1933 and began rebuilding German military aviation, opportunities for ambitious young pilots expanded dramatically. Lersch joined the Luftwaffe and by 1943 had become the principal test pilot at Rechlin. His specialty was captured aircraft. Lersch had flown over 120 different aircraft types during his career, including virtually every captured Allied design that fell into German hands. He had test-flown captured Avro Lancaster bombers, B-17 Flying Fortresses, B-24 Liberators, and B-26 Marauders. He had evaluated Spitfires, Mustangs, Thunderbolts, Hawker Typhoons and Tempests, Soviet Yak-3 and Lavochkin La-5 fighters. He had even flown captured aircraft to Italy in June 1944 to retrieve additional examples, landing in Rome just days before it fell to American forces. Lersch's approach to testing was systematic and fearless. He had no flight manuals for captured aircraft. American and British operational documents rarely fell into German hands intact. Instead, Lersch relied on engineering knowledge, pilot intuition, and careful experimentation. He would study the cockpit, identify controls by their function and location, start engines by logical procedure, and take off relying on skill accumulated across 120 aircraft types. Throughout his entire career, Lersch never crashed or seriously damaged a single aircraft. This record was extraordinary, considering he routinely flew unfamiliar designs without documentation. His combination of technical understanding, flying skill, and cautious experimentation made him the ideal pilot to evaluate the P-38. When Lersch first approached the captured Lightning at Rechlin, his initial impressions matched Tondi's observations. The aircraft looked sleek, purposeful, and fast, even sitting still. The twin-boom configuration was unusual but logical once the design philosophy became clear. The engines were positioned to provide optimal thrust while the central nacelle minimized drag. The tricycle gear sat the aircraft level, providing excellent visibility. Climbing into the cockpit, Lersch faced the same challenge he encountered with every captured aircraft. Every label was in English, every instrument gauge used American units, every switch and lever had to be identified by position, function, and logical relationship to other controls. The engine start procedure took experimentation. Lersch identified the master battery switches, located the fuel boost pump controls, found the mixture levers, and determined that the magneto switches were integrated into a master ignition system different from German practice. The Allison engines had electric starters rather than the inertia starters common on German aircraft. After several minutes of careful study, Lersch successfully started both engines. The sound was smooth, powerful, and promising. Taxiing revealed the same advantages that had impressed Tondi: perfect forward visibility, stable ground handling, no tendency to weather vane in crosswinds. The takeoff was unremarkable in the best possible way. The aircraft simply flew when sufficient speed was achieved. No drama, no torque correction, no anxious moments. Lersch climbed away from Rechlin and began his evaluation. The P-38's speed impressed him immediately. At cruise power settings, the Lightning achieved velocities that required emergency power in most German fighters. The Messerschmitt Bf 109G, backbone of the Luftwaffe fighter force, could match the P-38's speed only in short bursts at full throttle. The Lightning cruised effortlessly at speeds the Messerschmitt could barely sustain. The altitude performance was even more remarkable. Lerche climbed through 20,000 feet and noted that the turbo-supercharged Allisons continued producing full power. At 25,000 feet, where German fighters struggled, the P-38 maintained combat capability. At 30,000 feet, the Lightning still flew strongly, while German interceptors would be at the edge of their operational envelope, slow and vulnerable. This altitude advantage represented a significant tactical problem for the Luftwaffe. American bomber formations flew at 25 to 30,000 feet, protected by P-38 escorts operating at optimal altitude, while German interceptors had to climb into thin air where their performance degraded dramatically. The handling revealed strengths and limitations. The hydraulically assisted ailerons provided decent roll rates, though not matching the explosive roll performance of German fighters with their lower wing loading and lighter control systems. The P-38 could roll, but it took time and distance. In a scissors maneuver where pilots attempted to reverse position through a series of crossing turns, German fighters would have an advantage. The elevator authority was positive but required significant force at high speeds. Lerche noted that pulling high-G maneuvers demanded physical strength. The control yoke did not move easily when airspeed exceeded 350 miles per hour. German fighters, with their lighter control loading, allowed more aggressive maneuvering with less pilot fatigue. Directional stability was excellent. The twin vertical stabilizers provided powerful yaw control, preventing adverse yaw during aggressive maneuvers. The aircraft tracked straight during climbs and responded predictably to rudder inputs. Stall characteristics were benign. As speed decreased, the aircraft provided ample warning through buffeting and mushy controls before reaching actual stall. There were no sharp wing drops, no tendency to snap roll into a spin. Recovery required simply relaxing back pressure and adding power. The P-38 was fundamentally a stable, predictable aircraft that rewarded proper technique. Dive performance revealed the limitations that would eventually lead to operational modifications. Lerche pushed the nose down and watched the airspeed indicator climb past 400 miles per hour. At approximately 0.68 Mach, roughly 500 miles per hour indicated airspeed at altitude, something unexpected happened. The control yoke began shaking violently. The nose tucked downward on its own, increasing the dive angle. Lerche pulled back on the yoke with both hands, trying to recover to level flight. Nothing happened. The elevators were ineffective. The aircraft continued diving, accelerating, the wing noise rising to a scream. This was compressibility tuck, an aerodynamic phenomenon barely understood in 1943. As the P-38 approached the speed of sound, airflow over parts of the wing and horizontal stabilizer actually reached supersonic speeds, even though the aircraft itself remained subsonic. This occurred because air accelerated as it flowed over curved surfaces. The top of the wing might see airflow at Mach 1.0, while the aircraft flew at Mach 0.68. When air went supersonic, it formed shock waves, sudden discontinuities where pressure, temperature, and density changed almost instantaneously. These shock waves separated the airflow from the surface, creating turbulent dead zones where control surfaces became ineffective. The P-38's horizontal stabilizer sat directly in this turbulent wake during high-speed dives, rendering the elevator useless. The aircraft continued diving until it descended into denser air at lower altitude, where the aerodynamic forces decreased and control authority returned. Lerche throttled back, extended dive flaps if equipped, and carefully recovered at lower altitude. The experience was sobering. The P-38 was fast, but it could not dive with impunity. German fighters that could handle higher Mach numbers had a critical advantage in dive escape maneuvers. After landing, Lerche compiled his observations into a detailed report. The P-38 Lightning represented genuine technological achievement. Its twin-engine configuration delivered speed and altitude performance that exceeded most German fighters. Its long range made it suitable for missions that single-engine fighters could not fly. Its concentrated nose armament provided devastating firepower. Its visibility and handling made it relatively easy to fly for pilots with proper training. But it also had exploitable weaknesses. In turning combat, lighter German fighters could outmaneuver the P-38. In high-speed dives, the Lightning suffered compressibility problems that German fighters did not encounter until higher velocities. And the aircraft's size made it a larger target than single-engine designs. Lurch's report recommended specific tactics for engaging P-38 seconds. German fighters should avoid turning engagements where the Lightning's power and energy could dominate. Instead, they should use vertical maneuvers, zooming climbs, and diving attacks that exploited German fighters' better high-speed handling. If a P-38 got on your tail, push the nose down and dive vertically. The Lightning could not follow without risking compressibility tuck. Maintain the dive until the P-38 broke off, then pull out and extend away. Use altitude advantage whenever possible. Dive from above, make a single firing pass, and climb away before the P-38 could respond. Avoid prolonged engagements where the American aircraft's superior sustained power would eventually prevail. These tactical recommendations were distributed throughout the Luftwaffe fighter force. The Circus Rosarius toured operational airfields across Germany, bringing captured aircraft, including the P-38, to demonstrate them to frontline pilots. The demonstrations served multiple purposes. They familiarized pilots with enemy aircraft recognition, ensuring that German pilots could identify threats quickly during combat. They provided visceral understanding of enemy capabilities that no written report could match. Seeing a P-38 accelerate away from a pursuing Bf-109 demonstrated the Lightning's speed advantage more effectively than any performance table, and they built confidence that enemy aircraft, however advanced, had weaknesses that could be exploited. At one airfield, the Circus demonstration included a mock dogfight between the captured P-38 and a Bf-109G. The German fighter's pilot was briefed to fight conventionally, engaging in turning combat as he would against any opponent. The result was educational. Initially, the Bf-109 had the advantage in turn rate. The German fighter could complete tighter circles, reversing direction more quickly. But the P-38's superior power meant it could sustain the turn without bleeding energy. While the American aircraft converted its power advantage into position, eventually maneuvering onto the German fighter's tail. When the exercise was repeated with vertical maneuvers, the result changed. The Bf-109 dove, then pulled up into a climbing extension. The P-38 attempted to follow, but at high speed encountered handling difficulties. The German fighter could dive faster, recover quicker, and climb away before the Lightning could bring its guns to bear. The demonstration proved Lurch's tactical recommendations. Avoid turning fights with the P-38. Use vertical maneuvers and dive escape tactics. The lessons were clear and immediately applicable. The captured P-38 continued flying from Rechlin through late 1943 and into 1944. The aircraft participated in additional evaluations, providing comparison data when other captured American fighters arrived. When a Republic P-47 Thunderbolt was captured in November 1943 after its pilot mistakenly landed at Cayenne, France, the two American fighters were tested side by side. The P-47 was faster in dives, heavier, and even more rugged than the P-38, but it had shorter range and climbed more slowly. The Lightning's superior altitude performance and better visibility made it the more dangerous escort fighter. When a North American P-51B Mustang was captured and restored to flying condition, the three American fighters were evaluated together. The Mustang was faster than the P-38 at all altitudes, more maneuverable, and easier to fly. German pilots quickly concluded that the P-51 represented the greatest threat, but the P-38's long range and twin-engine reliability still made it formidable. In the hierarchy of American fighters, German test pilots rated the Mustang first for overall combat effectiveness, the Thunderbolt second for ruggedness and dive performance, and the P-38 third, but still highly capable. These evaluations influenced German tactical doctrine and fighter development. Understanding enemy capabilities allowed Luftwaffe pilots to fight more effectively, choosing engagements where they held advantages and avoiding situations that favored Allied aircraft. But the reports also revealed an uncomfortable truth that German commanders could not ignore. American fighter design had matured rapidly. The P-38, while not perfect, represented sophisticated engineering that challenged German technical superiority. The Mustang that followed was even better. The tide of technological advantage that Germany had enjoyed in the war's early years was shifting. In December 1944, the captured P-38 coded T9+XB made its final flight from Rechlin. The aircraft had served its purpose, providing detailed intelligence about American fighter capabilities. But by late 1944, Allied bombing had made continued operation increasingly difficult. Rechlin itself came under regular attack. Fuel supplies were critically short. Spare parts for the Lightning's Allison engines were impossible to obtain. The decision was made to cease flying the captured P-38 and preserve the aircraft as a static display for training purposes. What happened to T9+XB after December 1944 remains uncertain. Some records suggest the aircraft was destroyed during an Allied bombing raid on Rechlin. Other accounts indicate it may have been deliberately destroyed by retreating German forces in early 1945 to prevent recapture. No physical evidence of the aircraft survives. It exists now only in photographs, pilot reports, and the memories of men who flew it or saw it, demonstrated during those twilight months when Germany's military fortunes crumbled. But the intelligence gathered from that single P-38G captured at Capoterra in June 1943 had lasting impact. The detailed evaluations conducted by Tondi, Lerche, and other test pilots provided comprehensive understanding of American fighter doctrine. German pilots learned to respect the Lightning's speed, altitude performance, and firepower, while exploiting its limitations in maneuverability and high-speed dive characteristics. These lessons saved German lives by enabling more effective combat tactics. The story of the captured P-38 also reveals the strange parallel world of test pilots on opposing sides. Tondi and Lerche were extraordinary aviators who shared more with their Allied counterparts than with most of their own countrymen. They understood aircraft as complex systems where aerodynamics, engine performance, and structural limits interacted in subtle ways. They appreciated good engineering regardless of which nation produced it, and they recognized that superior equipment provided advantages that courage alone could not overcome. In his memoir written decades after the war, Lerche described the P-38 with professional respect. He noted its speed, its power, its sophisticated systems. He acknowledged that American engineering had produced a formidable combat aircraft, and in one telling passage, he wrote that he had never seen twin-engine speed like the Lightning. For a test pilot who had flown over 120 aircraft types, including German twin-engine designs and captured Allied types, this admission carried weight. The P-38 represented something fundamentally different from conventional fighters. The technical analysis reveals why. Most twin-engine fighters before the P-38 were heavy interceptors or destroyers, large aircraft designed to carry heavy armament for bomber interception but too sluggish for fighter versus fighter combat. The Messerschmitt Bf 110, Germany's premier twin-engine fighter in the war's early years, was fast but could not turn with single-engine opponents. British twin-engine types like the Bristol Beaufighter were powerful but optimized for night fighting or ground attack, not air superiority. The P-38 was different. It was designed from the start as a high-altitude, high-speed fighter that happened to have two engines rather than a twin-engine design, trying to perform as a fighter. Lockheed's radical configuration distributed mass efficiently, placed engines where they provided maximum thrust with minimum drag, and packaged the pilot in a central nacelle that minimized fuselage cross-section. The result was an aircraft with twin-engine power, but approaching single-engine aerodynamic efficiency. This design philosophy produced the speed that so impressed Axis test pilots. When they said they had never seen twin-engine speed like it, they were recognizing that the P-38 had redefined what twin-engine fighters could accomplish. The Lightning's combat record validated the design. In the Pacific Theater, P-38 seconds shot down more Japanese aircraft than any other American fighter. America's top two aces, Richard Bong with 40 victories and Thomas Maguire with 38, both flew Lightnings. The aircraft's long range made it ideal for the vast distances of Pacific operations. Its twin engines provided reliability over open water, where single-engine fighters faced certain death from mechanical failure. Its speed and altitude performance dominated Japanese fighters that excelled in maneuverability but lacked power at high altitude. In the Mediterranean theater, P-38 seconds provided long-range bomber escort and ground attack capabilities that shortened the campaign. In northern Europe, the Lightning struggled with cold weather issues that plagued the Allison engines and inadequate cockpit heating. But even there, specialized P-38 units achieved success by adapting tactics to the aircraft's strengths. The fork-tailed devil, as Germans called it, earned its reputation through performance in combat rather than propaganda. The final chapter of the story belongs to the pilot whose navigation error at Capoterra started everything. His name remains unknown, or at least unrecorded in accessible historical documents. What happened to him after being taken prisoner is similarly unclear. He likely spent the remainder of the war in a POW camp, perhaps in Italy, perhaps in Germany. He probably never knew that the aircraft he inadvertently delivered to the enemy would be studied so thoroughly, flown so extensively, and provide such valuable intelligence. His navigation error was his personal catastrophe, but for military historians studying how nations evaluated enemy technology, his mistake created a documentary record that reveals much about both American design philosophy and Axis tactical thinking. The broader significance extends beyond one aircraft and one capture. The P-38 evaluation demonstrates that even in total war, technical professionals maintained standards of objective analysis. Tondi and Lerche did not dismiss the Lightning as inferior simply because it was enemy equipment. They tested it thoroughly, documented its capabilities honestly, and recommended tactics based on evidence rather than wishful thinking. This professional integrity made their reports valuable to German commanders trying to develop effective counter-tactics. It also reveals the limitations of intelligence gathered from captured equipment. Tondi and Lerche evaluated the P-38G, a mid-production variant. They never saw the later J and L models with dive recovery flaps that partially addressed compressibility problems. They never experienced the improved cockpit heating in late-war variants. They never tested the aircraft with the fuel management techniques Charles Lindbergh would teach to extend range dramatically. Their evaluation was accurate for the specific aircraft they flew, but could not account for ongoing improvements in later production variants. This limitation affected all captured equipment evaluations by both sides. Allied technical intelligence units evaluating captured German fighters faced the same problem. They tested specific examples at specific points in time, but aircraft development continued. The Messerschmitt Bf 109 G6 that the Allies evaluated in 1943 differed significantly from the 109 G14 models flying in 1945. Captured Japanese aircraft tested in Australia in 1942 were different from the improved versions deployed in 1944. Intelligence from captured equipment provided snapshots, not complete pictures. Yet, despite these limitations, the intelligence value remained substantial. Understanding enemy capabilities enabled tactical responses that saved lives and improved combat effectiveness. German pilots who learned from the Circus Rosarius demonstrations had better chances of surviving encounters with P-38 seconds than pilots who fought blindly. American pilots who learned from Allied technical intelligence reports about German fighters similarly gained advantages. The parallel worlds of test pilots on opposing sides, evaluating each other's aircraft, created a strange technical dialogue conducted through captured equipment and combat experience. The P-38 story also highlights the role of individual error in warfare. One pilot's navigation mistake provided the enemy with complete access to an advanced fighter. Security procedures existed to prevent such incidents. Pilots were supposed to verify position constantly. Navigation, equipment was supposed to be reliable. But systems fail, humans make mistakes, and occasionally those mistakes have strategic consequences. The pilot who landed at Capoterra probably spent years afterward replaying those moments, wondering how he misread his position so catastrophically, trying to understand how he mistook enemy territory for Allied airspace. Other similar incidents occurred throughout the war. Pilots confused enemy airfields for friendly bases and landed among opponents. Aircraft with mechanical problems diverted to what they thought were safe landing sites, only to discover they had crossed lines. New pilots with inadequate navigation training became disoriented and made catastrophic decisions. Each incident provided the enemy with intelligence opportunities. Each represented an individual pilot's nightmare and a nation's security breach. The Capoterra incident was unusual only in how valuable the captured aircraft proved to be. For students of military history, the tale of German pilots flying the captured P-38 offers lessons beyond technical specifications and tactical recommendations. It demonstrates that enemies in total war still recognized quality in each other's equipment. It shows that professional test pilots maintained objectivity even when evaluating opponents' designs. It reveals that technological superiority, while advantageous, was never absolute. Every aircraft had strengths and weaknesses. Every design involved compromises. Superior tactics could partially compensate for inferior equipment, though superior equipment well flown remained the ultimate advantage. The men who built, flew, and fought in these aircraft were pursuing the same goals through different means. Lockheed engineers designing the P-38 wanted to create the best fighter possible to protect American bombers and destroy enemy aircraft. German engineers designing the Bf-109 pursued identical goals for their own forces. Test pilots on both sides sought to understand aircraft performance completely, recognizing that incomplete knowledge killed pilots and lost battles. Combat pilots on both sides wanted aircraft that would keep them alive and let them accomplish their missions. The national insignias were different, the motivations were universal. This universality makes the story of the captured P-38 compelling beyond military history enthusiasts. It is a story about human ingenuity, professional competence, the consequences of error, and the strange respect that technical professionals maintain even across battle lines. Tondi did not hate the P-38 for being American. Lerche did not disparage it for being enemy equipment. They evaluated it objectively because their professionalism demanded nothing less. And when they concluded their reports with admissions that they had never seen twin-engine speed like the Lightning, they were acknowledging excellence regardless of which nation produced it. The P-38 Lightning continued in American service until the war's end. Production totaled 10,037 aircraft, employed across every theater where American forces fought. The distinctive twin-boom silhouette became iconic, representing American air power in an era when air superiority often determined victory or defeat on the ground below. Post-war, remaining Lightnings were quickly retired as jet aircraft rendered piston fighters obsolete. But during the critical years from 1942 to 1945, the Lightning provided capabilities that no other fighter could match. The captured P-38G at Capoterra, coded T9 plus XB by the Germans who flew it, represented one aircraft among thousands. Its individual contribution to the war effort was negative, as it provided intelligence to the enemy. But its contribution to history was significant. Through the detailed evaluations conducted by Tondi and Lerche, through the reports they filed, and the demonstrations they conducted, through the tactical recommendations that flowed from their analysis, this single captured aircraft created a documentary record that illuminates both American fighter design excellence and Axis tactical adaptation. It preserved in technical language and pilot observations a moment in time when enemies evaluated each other's capabilities with professional respect and grudging admiration. And in those moments when Lerche wrote that he had never seen twin-engine speed like the Lightning, he was bearing witness to engineering achievement that transcended national boundaries. The P-38 was fast not because it was American, but because Kelly Johnson's team had solved fundamental problems of fighter design in revolutionary ways. The twin engines provided power. The streamlined configuration minimized drag. The turbo superchargers enabled high-altitude performance. The concentrated armament delivered devastating firepower, and the result flew faster than any twin-engine fighter that had come before, surprising enemy test pilots who thought they understood the limits of such designs. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.